The latest, Trump and Macron meet at G7 summit in this June 7, 2018. Photo. President Donald Trump listens during his meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in the Oval Office of the White House in Washington. Under attack from longtime allies over new tariffs, Trump descends on the annual G7 meeting of industrialized nations Friday, expecting tough trade talks as his go-it-alone policies leave him increasingly isolated. AP photo, Susan Walsh, LAMALBAIE, Quebec, AP. The latest on President Donald Trump and the annual Group of Seven meeting of industrialized nations, all times local, 6:15 p.m. President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron are meeting for the second time on the opening day of an international summit in Canada. Their meeting Friday at the Group of Seven summit in Quebec comes as Trump has angered allies with new tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Mexico and the European Union. Macron also tried, unsuccessfully, to keep Trump from withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal. Trump said, "We have a little test every once in a while." He cited the U.S. very big trade deficit with the EU, and predicted that something very positive will happen. Macron said they had an open and direct discussion earlier and that he sees a critical path and way to progress altogether on trade, _5:09 p.m. President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are meeting at a world leader summit in Canada amid their tensions over trade. Trump joked Friday that Trudeau had agreed to cut all tariffs and trade barriers between their countries, prompting laughs. Trudeau said trade will continue to be a topic of discussion. Their sit-down comes days after Trump announced tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the European Union, Canada and Mexico, and as talks over the North American Free Trade Agreement appear to have ground to a halt. Trudeau has called the tariffs totally unacceptable, and said they would permanently alter the bilateral relationship. He also has announced plans to reciprocate by slapping tariffs on U.S. exports to Canada. Trump said they would also discuss NAFTA, _3:20 p.m. President Donald Trump and his world counterparts have opened the first working session of a meeting of major industrialized nations in Canada. Trump was seated between the host, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and was seen chatting amiably with both. Others leaders participating in Friday's meeting in Quebec are from Britain, France, Japan and Italy. The European Union also participates in the annual gathering. Trump has angered most of the leaders in attendance with his stance on trade and other policies, _3 p.m. President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron of France have met briefly before world leaders convened in Canada. White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders says they discussed trade. A more formal meeting between the two is expected later Friday. Macron's office says Trump asked to see him, and they discussed North Korea and trade during a very cordial discussion of about 10 minutes. Macron tweeted video of the meeting at the Group of Seven summit site in Quebec. His caption said, "Pursuing the conversation. Engaging, keeping the dialogue alive now. Sharing, reaching out, always, to promote the interests of the French people, and all those who believe in a world we can build together." With President Donald Trump, prior to the opening of G7 summit, Trump and Macron are at odds over the U.S. president's policies on trade and matters, _2:25 p.m. The Group of Seven leaders have posed for a family photo on the first day of the International Summit of Industrialized Nations in Canada. President Donald Trump stood between German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the ceremonial G7 photo. The president then paused to speak with Merkel as the other leaders exited the spot overlooking the street. Lawrence River in Quebec. Trump chatted with new Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker Juncker as they walked up to the photo shoot. The meeting comes amid tensions over Trump's trade policies and his call for Russia to be allowed back into the elite group of nations. 12:40 p.m. President Donald Trump and other leaders of major industrialized nations meeting in Quebec are working through a lunch featuring Arctic char escabeche perfumed with Labrador tea and a buckwheat salad with red apple, rhubarb, and balsam fir spiral. That will be followed by veal and a dessert described as a haskap berry and cedar snowball, with northern saffron crème anglaise. 3 meals hosted by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau draw heavily on ingredients from the host Charlevoix region, including quail eggs from nearby Bay St. Paul, organic meats and Charlevoix mushrooms. Friday's dinner will feature Charlevoix duck breast in all its forms, Canadian lobster tail as well as Galloway beef fillet, 12:25 p.m. President Donald Trump has greeted Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the Group of 7 meeting in Quebec. The leaders showed no outward signs of tension over their trade dispute. They had a brief cordial exchange at the summit site overlooking the St. Lawrence River. Trump walked along the grounds of the summit and then shook hands with Trudeau and his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. The leaders smiled and spoke briefly, with Trump putting his left hand on the Prime Minister's shoulder. Trump and Trudeau have been at odds over the U.S. President's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Trudeau has called the tariffs insulting and unacceptable, 11:30 a.m. President Donald Trump's planned meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron at the G7 is being pushed back into late Friday afternoon. Trump was running about 45 minutes behind schedule when Air Force One landed in Quebec. Trump and Macron were scheduled to hold talks Friday morning, but Macron's office says they are now expected to meet at 5:40 p.m. The White House says they're working to reschedule the meeting for later in the day. The president appeared to be in no hurry to leave for Canada earlier Friday. He walked out of the White House more than half an hour late and spent time greeting supporters gathered on the South Lawn. Trump then took questions from reporters for nearly 20 minutes, 10:45 a.m. Canadian police have peacefully cleared demonstrators and reopened a road leading to the Group of 7 summit site in Quebec after a tense standoff between police and protesters. Police in riot gear encircled about 100 protesters who had blocked a road leading to the small town north of Quebec City where G7 leaders are gathering for a 2-day summit. Protesters chanted anti-capitalist slogans and marched in the street, vowing to disturb the 44th annual summit of the countries representing the majority of global wealth. The crowd remained defiant and stood their ground in the middle of an intersection with officers in riot gear blocking them at every corner and helicopters flying overhead. Protesters said they achieved their goals of shutting down Quebec City after the legislature was closed down on Friday and many businesses decided to shut their doors. 10:40 a.m. European Council President Donald Tusk says the U.S. is challenging the international order. Tusk made the remarks at the Group of 7 summit in Quebec, where President Donald Trump will be meeting with the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Italy, Germany and Japan. Asked what he thought of Trump's comments that Russia should be invited back into the G7, Tusk said, "It's not easy to be surprised by President Trump. He says it should remain 7. _____ 10:15 a.m. Italy's new premier is backing President Donald Trump's call for Russia to return to the group of industrial nations. Giuseppe Conte tweeted on Friday, "I agree with the president and real Donald Trump. Russia should go back into the G8. In the interest of all." Russia was ousted from the elite G8 group, now known as the G7, in 2014 as punishment for President Vladimir Putin's annexation of Crimea and its support for pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. Conte's populist coalition includes the right-wing League Party, which says sanctions on Russia over Ukraine hurt Italian exports. League leader Matteo Salvini, who has praised Russian President Vladimir Putin as a great statesman and says Italy will lobby for the end of European Union sanctions against Russia over the annexation of Crimea. Conte, a political novice who didn't run for election, is making his international debut at the G7 meetings in Canada. Salvini and fellow Eurosceptic coalition partner Luigi Di Maio, of the Five Star Movement, agreed to back Conte so their parties could govern. ___9:10 a.m. President Donald Trump is digging in on his threat to pull out of the North American Free Trade Agreement if he can't make a better deal with America's neighbors. Trump tells reporters that, "If we are unable to make a deal, we'll terminate NAFTA, we'll have a better deal." He spoke as he left the White House en route to what is sure to be a tense summit in Canada with leaders of the group of 7 leading industrialized nations. He also says he'll make a deal, very easily, nonetheless. Trump is also continuing to rail against Canada, Mexico and the European Union, saying their trade practices treat the U.S. unfairly. Trump's protectionist tariffs on steel and aluminum imports are expected to be a major subject of discussion at the meeting, ____8:30 a.m. President Donald Trump is calling for Russia to be reinstated to the leading group of industrialized nations, now known as the Group of 7. Trump tells reporters, Russia should be in the meeting, should be a part of it. Russia was ousted from the elite group in 2014 as punishment for President Vladimir Putin's annexation of Crimea and its support for pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. The suspension was supported by the other members of the group, including the US, Canada, Japan and 4 European nations. Special counsel Robert Mueller is investigating whether Trump associates colluded with Russia in a bid to sway the 2016 presidential election in Trump's favor. ____7:25 a.m. President Donald Trump says he won't be talking about the Russia probe for a while because he'll be focused on trade talks at the annual Group of 7 meeting of industrialized nations. Trump notes on Twitter that he's heading for Canada, where the nation's leaders are gathering at a Quebec resort. Several are expected to challenge Trump's new trade policies, which include tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Trump tweets that the talks will mostly center on the long-time unfair trade practiced against the United States. After that, he'll head to Singapore for a summit with North Korea. He adds, won't be talking about the Russian witch hunt hoax for a while, ____6:40 a.m. President Donald Trump says he is looking forward to straightening out unfair trade deals at the annual Group of 7 meeting. The group of industrialized nations is gathering at a Quebec resort for discussions that are expected to be tense. The leaders from France and Canada say they will push back against new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Trump showed no signs of budging on his trade policies Friday, tweeting, looking forward to straightening out unfair trade deals with the G7 countries. If it doesn't happen, we come out even better, ____ 1:50 a.m. President Donald Trump is set to descend on the annual Group of 7 meeting of industrialized nations, expecting tough trade talks as his go-it-alone policies leave him increasingly isolated. On the eve of Friday's gathering at a Quebec resort, French President Emmanuel Macron and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau previewed what will likely be a tense 2 days. They stressed the need for respectful dialogue but say they will push back against new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, as they have on other issues. Trump is showing no signs of backing away from what he sees as key campaign promises. He tweeted Thursday, "Getting ready to go to the G7 in Canada, to fight for our country on trade. We have the worst trade deals ever made." Copyright 2018 The Associated Press. All rights reserved. This material may not be published, broadcast, written or redistributed.